Okay, and we welcome those at home. You mightn't have seen that this was the second start because I didn't stop. It's lovely to have you here to share with us in this time. Our reading for today is from James, and it's James 1, verses 19 to 27, and you can pause that and restart and join us for the message. So, a bit of a spoiler alert. Okay, spoiler alert is that I had intended to get to this reading and get to the part of we can't be just hearers of the word, but we've got to be doers of the word. Okay? But I didn't get there. So the spoiler is we may be revisiting this same reading next week because I couldn't get past the first 3 verses. There's a lot said in the first 3 verses, verses 19, 20 and 21. And it starts off with, James stressing that you must understand this. You must understand this. In the importance though, he's not just there barking at somebody. We see that there's a gentleness here, a sincerity here that you must hear this, my beloved. He's not just barking orders. This is a thought, a message, a correction that is a challenge that is to those that he loves. Okay? He goes on to address something that is a significant struggle for a lot of us. May I suggest all of us. Quick to listen and slow to speak. Think about those words. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Have you ever noticed that when you're having a conversation with someone, it's very easy to be on the same page when everything's in alignment? Yeah? Is that right? You don't want to argue with someone who agrees with what you're saying, do you? No. Of course we don't. But what about when we have a conversation when we don't see eye to eye or we have a different point of view? Think about how those conversations go. Sometimes I think we're more concerned with communicating our point of view that we might convince the other of our opinion that we don't listen to what's going on. We're too busy thinking about how we can communicate what we think. And what happens in those moments, that's the thing. We're only partially listening. We only hear what we want to hear. We only sort of go over the top of what we want to hear in order that we can prove our point, prove that we are right. That they are wrong. They've lost it. We're actually thinking more about our own argument than listening to what somebody else has to say. And I always get this backwards, but there's a difference between hearing and listening. You heard that before? Yeah. I can hear people outside here talking, but I mightn't be able to make out what they're saying unless I take the time to actually listen. Alright? Listening requires intent. Can anyone see the significance in what James is challenging us with here? Have you ever been in that space where 2 strong individuals have come back together and they're very opinionated in what they're saying. There's often not a lot of listening going on. Do you notice how it's always easier to see it in somebody else, never in ourselves? You see, Barclay suggests that there's 4 characters in scholars, he says, but he's referring to people, basically. There's those, the first one is those who are quick to hear and quick to forget. Alright? So, they're quick to hear and understand something. Does that make sense? Quick to hear and understand. But then they're quick to forget. So the positive of being quick to understand or comprehend is cancelled out by the fact that they're quickly going to forget it. You ever heard the saying, in one ear, out the other? You know? Okay? So that's not ideal. Alright? The second one is slow to hear and slow to forget. If I was looking at the four things, I want to get to number 3. Number 3 is the ideal one, which is, that's another spoiler alert, but this one here, this is where I see me. Slow to hear. I can be a bit slow to take on ideas, to understand. Okay? But I'm slow to forget. Once they've got it, they've got it. But, you know, what about those painful times in trying to communicate it till they get it? You know? I think that I'm going to embarrass James here. Sorry, James. I remember James as a little boy. We were only joking about this the other day, and we used to get reading words that we had to take him through when he was learning to read. We were there, and we used to have to spend up to 2.5 hours some days taking him through these 15 words. And you knew when he wasn't going any further because we hold up a card and it said cat. And we would spell it out. C-A-T. Sound it out, James. Cat. And you'd go, cat. Swim. You know, you knew that moment wasn't going any further. Do you know what I mean? It's slow to hear, but now he knows how to spell cat. You know, so he's been slow to forget. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, it seems. You know? But then we've also got those that are quick to hear and slow to forget. Alright? So those that are quick to hear and slow to forget, Barclay says they are wise. Okay? They get the concept and they don't forget it. They can apply it. Then you've got the fourth one. And look, he doesn't have a lot of nice things to say about those, and those are the ones that are slow to hear and quick to forget. He actually refers to them as an evil lot. I think that's a bit harsh, but you know, it's certainly not the ideal. It's the one that we don't want to be in that fourth number there. The ideal is to be in that number 3, quick to hear, slow to forget, which requires us to grow, to learn. And the book of Proverbs highlights how important it is to be able to hear, to listen. You know, when Proverbs 10:19 says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but the prudent are restrained in speech. Proverbs 13 verse 3 says, those who guard their mouths preserve their lives. Those who open their lips come to ruin. Proverbs 17:28. I like this one. Even fools who keep silent are considered wise. When they close their lips, they are deemed intelligent. And Proverbs 29 verse 20 says, do you see someone who is hasty in speech? There is more hope for a fool than anyone like that. So you can see how important it is that we should be listening. James has said how we need to be quick to listen and slow to speak. The Proverbs are reinforcing that. And it's really hard when we're struggling with that human element of ourselves, especially when we really believe something. You know, I was reminded of that saying. I'm sure you've heard it before. I've had it said to me a lot of times. Better to say nothing and let people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. You know, as I read this, I'm reminded I've got a long way to go. And I'm sure that, you know, we can see these characteristics in those around us, because obviously it's always easier to see it in somebody else, but maybe even if we take the time to reflect, we can see this attitude within ourselves. And we need to get the gist and the understanding of this because, there's a reason why this is important. We know these non-listing exchanges don't usually go well. And I've been there myself, certainly more times than I would like to be. Even when, it's either confrontation or even those times where you choose not to say something, it's easy for anger to come in, isn't it? So we can get angry in the exchanges, can't we? Can you understand that? When two people are at loggerheads and they both believe something, it's easy to get angry in those moments, isn't it? Because they're not listening, are they? Neither was I, So, it's easy to get angry in those moments. But what about when we've chosen not to say anything? Have you ever had those moments and gone home and said, I wanted to say, you're still taking the anger home with you, it's still there. You see what I'm saying? This attitude of not being able to listen and intent on giving our own opinion all the time and being right breeds something that is not good, and that's anger within ourselves. And James goes on to talk about the fruit that comes from this. He says, it's easy to be angry and in an exchange that doesn't produce fruit, or as James says, does not produce God's righteousness. So when we're in those spaces, we're not producing God's righteousness because we're harbouring this stuff within ourselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's easy to be moving in these spaces. We can go home and we choose to remain silent. We go home, we bottle it up, then we go home and have a whinge. Poor old Tiffany has to listen to me all the time. I would have liked to have been able to let stuff go. And we have to let it go. We have to try to be slow to anger. Because when we're responding from that, we're responding from the wrong place. That's about us. And we'll get to where we should be responding probably in a minute. Barclay suggests that this is where we move into the next part. So we're talking about anger here now. So we move from how easy it is with words and that to get into this bad space, and then we're dealing with the fruit of what this not listening and not being respectful and sharing and all this sort of stuff goes into, and now we're dealing with that anger side of things. And Barclay suggests that the teacher or preacher or even parent will be tempted to anger. And he reminds us that encouragement and patience will achieve more than, I've got written here, jumping up and down. Do you understand what jumping up and down is? Yeah, that's when you're angry, isn't it? But we don't tend to naturally move in that space, and therein lies the problem. In fact, he suggests that when we choose to move in this space, anger produces negative stuff that has an ongoing impact. Okay? This is why it's important. It produces ongoing impact. How easy is it to not see eye to eye with someone and carry resentment? That's an easy thing to be moving in that space to entertain, isn't it? We know we should forgive, but it's easy to hold on to, isn't it? Especially when we're angry. Okay? This is what makes the challenge, So I imagine my teachers would have had a terrible time. We can be tempted to move in that place. What happens is the negative stuff, the way we start looking at it, we can have resentment, we can have stubborn resistance, we can have that constant irritability, where someone comes before you and straight up they haven't even said anything. And it could be from an exchange that happens way back. It has ongoing impacts, this negative stuff. What about, when you're just annoyed or nagging? It can cause you to nag. How many times have I told you that cat is spelled C-A-T, not swim? You know? I needed to know this back then, Joe. You know, it has that ongoing thing. We don't want to be moving in anger. How are you going with all that? Probably got it all together. I'm getting me struggles with this. He suggests, Barclay suggests, that slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen is a good policy for life. And I've got written here, James support this, but no, it's really Barclay that's supporting James. And James goes on, he says, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness. Okay? We could read that as rid ourselves too, couldn't we? According to Barclay, the ridding of these things, and I'm sure you can see by now that it's necessary to get this attitude away from us. And that's what is moving into. So, you know, we've got the thing there where it's easy to be in this confrontational stuff that causes us to anger, and we can be harbouring these feelings that are not of the righteousness of God. And he says, get rid of it. And, you know, the ridding of things that is the equivalent of saying the stripping off of one's clothes. Get rid of the clothes. Tear them from your body. Okay? That's what it means. It means get rid of those soiled garments. In my simple mind, I had an illustration when I was in the workshop as a mechanic. Okay? I used to, at one point, wear overalls. And, you know, the temptation that it is in a dirty, oily, greasy environment, you know, when you're already covered in dirt and oil and grease and rot, you know, the icing on the cake is you're wearing these overalls and the phone rings. You're up to here in grease and oil, and it's like, you know, so you already got these dirty stuff on, and then you continue to soil it more deeply. Does that make sense? The temptation is there, and you know, and it would be well and truly soiled, you know, right the way through. It wasn't just on the surface; it was right the way into the fibres of the clothes. And, you know, while I was in the environment, while I was in the workshop, do you think it bothered me? It didn't. Not at all. I didn't even notice. But when I got home, I couldn't sit on anything. The stink of the dirt and the oil, you know, it would fill the house. And, you know, there's times there where you'd have to take the overalls off and take them straight out to the laundry. You'd walk out to the laundry after they'd been sitting there, and you could smell the dirt and the oil and the grease. Especially gearbox oil has a really terrible smell. They couldn't be washed with anything else. You know? And the best thing, the only thing was to get rid of them. Get them off. But it wasn't until you removed it that you would see. It wasn't until you removed it that you would understand what a hindrance it was to so many things. How offensive it was to myself, but also to those around me. How beneficial it was. Do you see what I'm saying? To get rid of this stuff that's in the way. You know, why would that correct attitude, why would it be important, do you think, for us to be hearers and listeners, and to not be angry, and to get rid of that stuff about us, so as we don't dwell in this unrighteousness? It follows on a little bit from last week. And, you know, it's linked with that. Not last week, the week before. It's linked to the need to grow in our maturity as followers of Jesus. when we're willing to get rid of that stuff that's not desirable, the defiled garment, so to speak, it's meaning less of self, less of that stuff and more of God. When we're humble and confident enough to be in a space where we're willing to be patient and to listen rather than impose and speak, when we're not falling to anger and negative associations that accompany it, that can be ongoing, when we're seeking to produce God's righteousness in His power, not our own, we can grow in our maturity because we become teachable. Does that make sense? Well, if we think we've got the answer and we're not willing to look past it, we can't grasp. It's a barrier. So having rid ourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, that's strong words by James, isn't it? We now seek to welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. Do you see where we're going? It's no longer self that we're responding to. The implanted word that has the power to save your soul. Barclay provides an interesting side here, and he refers to the parable of the sower, where the seed of the word is sown into the hearts of the people. And this is made known through the prophets, through his teachers, and far above all else, the one who is the Word, Jesus Himself. And this is how God says His truth into hearts. If there is other stuff there that is in the way, if we're filled with our own opinion, our own desires, our own understanding, our own self-righteousness, if we're filled with the anger or the resentment or whatever it is that's associated with being there, if we're not willing to rid that stuff and get it out of the way, it can't penetrate or permeate our hearts. The wise, the teachable, those that are willing to remove that stuff, the obstacles of self, opinion, anger, are able to receive and welcome and grow as followers of Jesus. Because having received that truth in Jesus, without hindrance, in humble awareness of what He did in Calvary, at Calvary, we are consciously submitting to that ongoing transformation in faith and in action. Learning and growing more and more, day by day, more like our Lord, and being willing to live out His call on our lives, not in response to what we know, but in response to His saving work. The stuff that is the power to save our souls. We respond to that. We have received that. Does any of this make sense? I don't think I've got anything else to add to it. I'm just going to say amen now. Amen. Let's pray. Lord, we just pray that we would be those teachable people. We want to grow. I ask forgiveness, Lord, for the times where I've walked in those ways, not willing to remove the stuff that is there, that I've built up. I want to know more of You, Lord. I want my responses. I want our responses, Lord, to be the same work that You've performed in us, for us. We pray, Lord, that You would grow us as Your disciples. That we would be those teachable, soft, malleable hearts, filled with love and grace, patience and slow to anger, slow to speak, be quick to listen. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I invite you now to say with me the Aaronic blessing as we bless those at home. So it should be up on the screen. Let's say this together. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.